Next up is workshop number 5, which is section 1-6, Warehouse and Parking Policies and Procedures, found on page 11 of the Expedition Leader's Manual. So building access here at the warehouse at 928 Harrison Street. You will be given a personal door code that gets you into the warehouse, and that will be for your use only. You never want to give that out to anyone else. The door codes are active from 4:30 in the morning to 11 p.m., so operating hours, a little bit beyond operating hours. We expect you to not stay in the warehouse and hang out any longer than it takes to clean up and do your post-trip inspection, finish off your paperwork, etc. Usually that should take no more than about 30 minutes. Though if you've had traffic or a breakdown of some sort of delay and you're returning after 11 p.m., inside the vehicle, the clickers that open the garage doors are going to work anytime. So you'll always be able to get back into the warehouse. The main thing to remember is that if you're in the warehouse after 11 p.m., the doors will not reopen. If you go outside, your door code won't work. And there's been an example of a situation where an expedition leader forgot about that and brought the garbage out at the back. The garbage was outside in the back alley in Clara Alley or Clara Lane, and went to drop the garbage in the garbage, forgot, and got locked out. And his cell phone, his wallet, everything was in a running vehicle in the middle of the warehouse, and that was not a pleasant situation. So just remember that access is limited in that way. So regarding your personal code for door access, I already basically mentioned you don't want to give that out to anyone else. That's for your use, and that's what allows us to track who's been in and out of the vehicle. We also don't want you to be making visits to the warehouse outside of work hours, and don't have any guests don't bring any guests into the warehouse area unless it's sort of an event that the company has sponsored and they've been invited. The exception, of course, is if you're coming to the warehouse during working hours, but you don't have a tour, but you need to come in for another reason. Alternatively, if you've gotten special permission from the manager on duty or the operations manager to come into the warehouse, that's okay. Paperwork. Don't have a lot of paperwork in this job, but what paperwork we do have you do, which we'll go over in more detail a little bit later, we expect it to be handed in at the end of each tour without exception and deposited into the safety drop box inside an envelope. So fold up everything, your list if you have one, your pickup list if you have one, your expense sheet, all your receipts, any tour vouchers that you collected, your 2 top copies of your logs, and any cash or traveler's checks that you might have collected. Fold that all up, put it into an envelope that can be found down at the driver's desk, and drop that into the drop box, the safety drop box. And don't do that at the end of every tour. If the paperwork gets too backed up, that is problematic for the people who are processing the paperwork, and that means our records aren't being kept up to date as much as possible. Trash. Part of your responsibility as an expedition leader, there's a certain amount of cleanup that you'll do at the end of each tour and at the beginning of each tour. At the end of each tour, you want to clear all trash out of your vehicle, anything that was left behind, so that there's nothing in the vehicle, no wrappers or bottles or newspapers, look under the chairs, etc. Most of the vehicles, except for the smaller vans, have a trash bin, so get everything in there, empty the trash bin, and bring it over to the dumpsters. We have recycling and we have regular trash, landfill, and we have composting. So if you certainly, if you can separate it, great. Um, and sometimes the trash bins and the recycle bins, etc., will be just outside on the days that they pick it up the next day. So just go outside and drop it in the appropriate bin. But remember, if it's after 11 p.m., don't get locked out. All right, so entering and exiting the warehouse and the garage door entry and exit may seem pretty straightforward, but there's quite a bit to think about here. There are two door sensors set up on each of the two garage doors. So one sensor will close the door automatically after 5 seconds when your vehicle is not in the doorway, which means that once you've clicked yourself out, or once you've pulled out, the garage door is going to close on its own. You don't need to click it closed using the fob. We do ask that, especially on Harrison Street, but even on Clara Lane, and particularly in the evening hours, if you're pulling away, because the door takes a little while to close, just kind of look out and make sure that nobody is around that could potentially sneak into the warehouse once you've sped off, and because that could be bad if someone sneaks in and has a little fun. So keep your eyes out for that, but the door will close automatically. Another thing is when the automatic roll-up doors begin to come down, there are occasions, especially in your personal car, there are occasions, and this is true mostly on Harrison Street where there's a lot of traffic, you might have pulled out to the point where the garage door has begun to come down because you're no longer crossing the plane, but traffic may have picked up and you can't drive out. And so then potentially the garage door might close on a portion of your car, the back part of your car, etc. Don't worry about that. The garage doors, the roll-up doors, have a nice soft rubber seal at their base, and if they do come down and touch your car, they'll just touch very lightly, won't damage it at all, and they'll go right back up again. So if it looks like the garage door is actually going to close on your car because you can't get out, the better approach is actually to wait, let it close and reopen. Again, it won't damage your car, versus trying to quickly move your car out of the way, potentially causing an accident in the street, or potentially, if you do it at the wrong time, ripping the garage door off and causing damage. So try to avoid that situation. And just generally, please take extreme caution when entering and exiting the warehouse to not hit the roll-up doors. When you're pulling up to the roll-up doors, whether it's to exit the warehouse or to enter the warehouse, make sure to stop, look up, and make sure that the roll-up doors are actually all the way open, because particularly in the buses, they're pretty high, and if the roll-up doors aren't all the way up, you can very easily, if you drive out too soon or drive in too soon, knock them, and that can severely damage those doors. And that has happened in the past, where a driver pulled in a little too quickly, and the top of the bus knocked the roll-up doors, knocked it off track, and that was very problematic. Those doors are not easily repaired. It takes a long time, and it's very expensive. And there is a manual way to open those doors, but it's hard to do, and it takes time. And in this particular case, the door was stuck, and we had to leave it in the closed position, which meant that we had to find a way to get whatever buses we needed out of the back, which is very difficult. Clara Lane, the entry and exit in Clara Lane does not work for the buses. It's too tight. And then we had to park the vehicles on the street for the next week while they were trying to repair the door. So it was it handicapped our operation quite a bit. So really be sensitive and careful with the garage doors. Don't hit them. Always stop. So as you're exiting the warehouse, once you've used, in each vehicle, there's a little clicker or a fob that is typically hanging on the gear shift, and in the buses there'll just be one button. In the vans and luxury vans, the fob has two buttons, a big button and a little button. The luxury vans, we always bring them in and out the rear entrance because uh, the rear of those vehicles is too low, and coming out the front entrance, they scrape the bumpers and the exhaust pretty badly. So all the time when you're in the luxury vans, you're always going to use the rear exit and entrance to come in and out of the building. And so as you're approaching the garage door, when you're exiting the building on either side of the building, once you've used the fob to open the door, as you're pulling up to the exit, honk your horn. That lets pedestrians know that a vehicle's coming out. Once you've done that, slowly pull the front of your vehicle out so it crosses the plane of the garage door. Checking to make sure there's no pedestrians coming. If there are pedestrians coming, please be courteous and let them by. And stop there again. Once you've cleared the plane, again the garage door will not close as long as your vehicle is in the plane of the eye of the system, so it'll stay open. And then once you've pulled the nose of your vehicle out a little bit, look left, look right, check for pedestrians, check the traffic situation, and once it's safe, pull out of the garage. On Harrison Street, that can be complicated because there can be traffic coming, there can be pedestrians coming, and you do want to go slowly. We ask that when you're driving into or out of the warehouse and inside the warehouse, you never go more than 5 miles an hour at idling speed. Sometimes that's challenging on Harrison Street, where you see your opportunity to pull out of the warehouse, but if you don't go fast, you're going to miss it because traffic is coming. You need to wait, or you need to just go slowly. Another problem is that the rear of the buses, which isn't quite as bad as in the luxury vans, but it's long and it's low, and most of the buses, if you pull out too quickly, the exhaust and sometimes even the bumper will scrape on the sidewalk as it's coming out. So you just want to take it nice and slow, be cautious, take a nice wide turn. Another potential danger as you're coming in and out of the warehouse actually are the cars parked to either side of the entry. People don't always adhere to the little red zones there, and so sometimes there's not a lot of space, and so if it's a little bit tight, it's good to get nice and far out of the warehouse into the street, into where Harrison, before you start to make your turn, so that you don't do any damage either to the vehicle on the wall of the building as you're exiting, or to any vehicles. You might hit a vehicle as you're turning onto Harrison Street, coming out of the garage with the dragon tail, and you could hit a vehicle there. So be real cautious. We'll move on to the next slide. Garage door entry and exit continued. So just to reiterate, drive out in the buses, vans, and luxury vans as slowly as possible, and that's true in your car as well, but particularly to prevent the back of the vehicles from dragging. The Clara Street door, the back entrance exit, is the preferred entry and exit for all vans, including luxury vans and personal cars. So whenever you're coming in and out, you want to use that exit as much as possible. And the luxury vans, absolutely, I've already mentioned this, but they have to use the Clara Street side because they're just too low in the back, and they will always drag and do damage to the back of the vehicle if you go out the Harrison Street side. But of course, do not use the Clara Street side for buses. Buses always have to enter and exit on the Harrison Street side because it's just there's not enough room at the Clara Street side to get the buses in and out, and there's not enough clearance to turn safely. And generally, entering and exiting the warehouse is a time time that can be very challenging. It takes a while to get comfortable with it. Um, just just be cautious. Returning to the warehouse in a bus, we'll address this a little bit more in drive training, but that also is very challenging in that in the buses to get into the Harrison Street entrance, especially if cars have not left you a lot of room on either side of the entrance, you have to take a nice wide turn, um, and you have to be pretty far out in Harrison Street. You have to be at least 3 lanes out, if not farther, to get the angle right. And so we'll address strategies for bringing the bus into the warehouse safely and successfully in drive training. But just know that it is something that you need to get confident with and be careful with. There is, I already mentioned the clickers, the fobs have separate buttons. Well, there's the vans and luxury vans have a clicker that has 2 buttons for the front and rear. Um, Also, never, when you're cleaning your vehicle in the morning, if you're sweeping out a bus, please don't sweep it out onto the warehouse floor. We've got dustpans and brooms. We expect you, once you've swept out your vehicle, to sweep it into the dustpan and toss that in the garbage. We don't actually have someone cleaning the warehouse after you, so it's really up to you to keep the warehouse clean. Um, Please do not leave or store personal items in the warehouse. Any items that you leave unattended are going to be placed in the lost and found or the garbage. We will assign you a small locker that you can use to keep your stuff here when you're not here, but just don't leave stuff lying around, please. In the vehicles, I think I've already mentioned this. If I haven't, always turn off all the electrical components in your vehicle before shutting it off. If you try to start a vehicle with the radio and the AC and the fan on already in the on position, it actually can drain the battery quite a bit, and it reduces the life of the battery. So keep that in mind. And when you're shutting off your vehicle at the end of a tour, put everything into the off position, turn off the stereo, etc. And then always lock and secure your van or bus, close all the windows. Yeah, lock up the vehicles. All right, parking. Still on page 12 of the manual, parking. When entering or exiting the warehouse through the Harrison side of the building, always avoid parking in the entryway near the driver's counter. We've had in the past drivers who will pull their van or bus up to that area while they, either at the end of the tour while they're doing their paperwork, or in the beginning of the tour they're collecting their audios and other stuff. Do not do that for any reason. Strictly prohibited. It may seem like not a big deal, but if anyone, particularly if a bus tries to come into the warehouse and there's a vehicle blocking that area, that creates a very dangerous situation out on Harrison Street. Buses that are coming into the warehouse need to have plenty of room to come right into the warehouse and not delay. So, and even in the morning, you may think it's okay, but there may be another driver who's assigned to a tour, and if you're blocking that area, they can't get out. So when you come to the warehouse in the morning, do all your vehicle prep, all your prep at the vehicle, leaving the vehicle in its parking space, and then just before you're ready to leave, pull your bus out, if you have a personal vehicle, pull it into the space that you vacated, and then head directly out. Don't block that entry area near the driver's desk. When you're parking with the buses, buses are always pulled forward at an angle into that side of the warehouse where the buses are parked. Do your best. Always use the assigned space as much as possible, or always actually. If you park a vehicle in a space that's not its assigned space, it kind of throws everything off. It creates actually a lot of problems. So always park your vehicle at the end of your tour back into the correct space that it's assigned to. And do your best to pull as far forward in the buses as you can, leaving as much clearance at the back of the vehicle for other buses to get through the warehouse and to make their turns as necessary. And try to park as close to the middle of the parking space. And this is true for the vans as well. Because as you may have noticed, the parking in the warehouse for the vehicles is quite tight. And if you park your vehicle a little bit off kilter, if you're not right in the middle of the assigned space, it's going to make other vehicles, it's going to make it hard for them to get parked or to get in and out of the vehicle, etc. So really pay attention and park right in the middle of the spot. Pull up as far as you can if you're in a bus. In the vans, you always want to back in. So buses get pulled in forwards. Vans always get backed in, as do personal cars. Back your van into its spot. Again, always in the middle of the parking space. Let's move on to the next slide. So before I get into parking personal vehicles, just a little bit more about parking generally. We allow expedition leaders to park their personal vehicles in the warehouse while they're out on tour. The idea there is that you always park your personal vehicle in the space that was vacated by the vehicle that you're using for the tour. Don't park anywhere else. We've had instances where expedition leaders have either forgotten or just not thinking, left their personal cars in spaces other than where the vehicle that they're using for their tour was supposed to be parked. And sometimes up in the mechanics area, sometimes other places. That's not acceptable. In particular, cars left up in the mechanics area, that area needs to remain clear at all times, because buses returning from tours need that space to make a nice turn at the back of the warehouse there, so that they can turn their buses around and get their buses into the correct parking space. So that mechanics area absolutely always needs to be left clear, and always park your personal car in the space vacated by the vehicle you're using on that day. And in general, unless you've had special permission from the operations manager or manager on duty, we don't allow our expedition leaders to park in the warehouse unless they're working. So, just to reiterate, generally our policy on parking, drivers are permitted to temporarily park their personal vehicle in the place the company in the place of the company vehicle they're driving, so long as you're in good standing and provide us with a copy of your registration, insurance, and key. So when you first start, we are going to ask you for a copy of your registration, your insurance, and your key, which we keep in our safe. And sometimes when you're out on tour, we need to be able to move your vehicle, so we have to have that ability to do so. Also, don't leave vehicles idling more than a couple minutes, personal vehicles. I've noticed on coming in the morning, getting ready for tours, people leaving their personal vehicles idling for 10-15 minutes while they're doing all their prep work for no good reason that I can think of. All they're doing is polluting the air and shortening their lives. So don't leave vehicles unnecessarily idling, whether it's your personal vehicle or buses. The air quality in this warehouse can quickly deteriorate if vehicles are running. So keep that in mind. Thank you. I've got another addition to parking before I move on to lighting in the warehouse. Generally, I've kind of already mentioned it, but all vehicles, whether they're vans being backed into their parking spaces, personal cars, buses being pulled forwards into their parking spaces, you want to get as deep into that parking space as possible, as close to the wall as possible, to keep the center of the warehouse as open as possible with as much space as possible. Because when buses return from their tours, they need a lot of room at the back of the warehouse to make a full turn. It's tight back there, and the more space they have, the better. to make that turn safely. Um, so that's it for parking. Moving on to lighting in the warehouse. Two of the overhead lights, the one at either end near the entrances on either side of the warehouse, will be left on during the evening, especially in winter when it gets dark before you're back from your tours. There's a light over the driver's desk area that stays on all the time. And then the lighting for the rest of the lighting is controlled by the switches in the driver's desk area, just below and to the right of the drop box and key box. Um, there is a control panel for lights. One switch controls the lights in the van area, one controls the center of the warehouse, and one controls the buses. So if you're arriving in the morning or coming late at night when it's still dark, use whatever lights you need for your area, but make sure to turn them off again. If you're leaving the warehouse at the end of the tour in the evening, please do turn off any lights that you've turned on. I think that's it for lights. I mentioned earlier we will assign you a locker. All expedition leaders will be assigned a locker. They're located in the bathroom area. We'll give you a combination lock. We ask that you use the combination lock you were assigned, not your own lock. So please only use that lock that we provide. Please don't keep any perishable items, food items, hazardous items, illegal items in your locker, especially food. Especially in the summer months, we have a little bit of an issue with fruit flies and other bugs. We have issues with being in the neighborhood that we're in down here, mice, potentially rats. So please don't leave, and this is true not just in your lockers, but in the warehouse in general, don't leave food out. That attracts the wrong kind of critters into our space, and we don't want those critters. The last thing you want to do to discover when you're here early in the morning doing your vehicle inspection is a friendly little creature hanging out in your bus. If you're on leave for more than 30 days, you'll be asked to remove all items from your locker and return the combination lock. And Extranomical does reserve the right to open any locker at any time to check for perishable items, hazard items, illegal items, or Extranomical property. So just keep that in mind. All right. Finally, other warehouse policies. We've got the area we like to refer to as the beer garden. That's an area that we use, the staff that work in the warehouse on a day-to-day basis. That's their lunch area. It's also the area we use for company events. Please keep it as clean as possible. Again, going back to not leaving any food or anything out, but also just clean up after yourself. We don't have a custodial staff here, and we are our own custodial staff. Offensive behavior is not allowed. Please keep the bathroom clean and report any problems to the operations manager. Alcohol is not allowed unless it's a company-sponsored event and a manager is present. We don't want people drinking alcohol unless it's an event and unless there's a manager present. Smoking is not allowed in the building, and you need to be at least 20 feet away from the entries of the building if you're going to smoke. There is a computer specifically there for the use of the expedition leaders on the driver's desk. That's there for you to be able to print out your pickup lists, to look over your pickup lists, to do any research related to your tour. But it's really only designed for work-related matters, so please don't download anything, especially we don't want to get any, don't download photos, files, programs, etc. If you're going to download something, do it on your personal computer. We don't want to acquire any unexpected viruses or anything of that nature. And if you're on the computer and another expedition leader is in need of it, please do your best to quickly get done whatever you need to get done and let them use that computer, because it's a shared computer. Thank you.